So if folks have questions, we have 2 roaming mics, but remember, not a lot of commentary, questions short, so we can get to more.
Hi, Bill. My name is Amy Seidel, and I'm here today with 15 undergraduates from the environmental program at UVM. And they're scattered around at tables. And I just wonder if, given that this is a community of people living in communities in Vermont, if you would just take a moment and address these 19, 20-year-old students. Can you give them some direction for the next bit of time, including their time at the university?
Well, first of all, we're very glad.
Yeah. Just lift the mic up on your collar there.
First of all, we're extremely glad you're here, and Amy, it's very good to see you. Look, somehow I've been turned off. Is that working? This one's working. This one's working. All right. Okay.
All right.
So, look, this is, among other things, this is going to have to be a completely multi-generational effort to get this done. It's not particularly fair that people currently in college should have to be sort of working hard on this. You've yet to cause an enormous share of the problem, but it makes sense that you would be, because your lives are going to be more blighted by this than the rest of us. I mean, I'm going to be dead before this hits in its absolute full force, but you're going to be absolutely in the prime of your careers and lives unless we're able to slow things down now. So that's why it's, there's no question that young people have provided an immense amount of the leadership in this fight, and nowhere more apparent than right at the moment. In the last week, our colleagues at college age, and in some cases younger, at the Sunrise Movement, have been doing great work to turn the U.S. House into a kind of center of climate resistance and leadership. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the new congresswoman from the Bronx, came and joined in a sit-in they were doing at Nancy Pelosi's office, and it looks like the result will be a select committee on what we're calling a Green New Deal. I mean, I've been writing about for years, but now it's, people are really starting to make it happen, and young people are absolutely in the lead. One of the things you should take heart in is looking around this room, where I noticed that there are 3 or 4 not so young people too, and that's really good. For the most part, too many older Americans have not taken part in this fight. In fact, if you look at the polling data, older people are the problem here. They're the ones who are voting for people who deny climate change and so on and so forth, and seem unwilling to change. And there's a certain amount of that one understands. I mean, I get it when people say they don't want to look at a windmill or whatever. I mean, sometimes I get annoyed and think that the Vermont state motto should be, do anything you want once I'm dead. But it is amazing to see this should give you heart to see elders acting the way that elders are supposed to act in working societies, and so good on you all. It's going to take absolutely everyone figuring out how to do the things that are most appropriate for them. And I'll just add, one of the things I've written about and said over the years is that I think one of the things that's most appropriate, when I wrote the letter asking people to come to Washington to take part in the Keystone protests and get arrested, which was the first big climate civil disobedience in many years. One of the things I said was, I didn't think in this case young people should have to be the cannon fodder, because if you were 19, perhaps an arrest record was not the very best thing for your resume. Well, one of the unmixed blessings of growing older is past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? You know? And so it was with great pleasure. We didn't ask people how old are you when they were getting arrested, but we did say who was president when you were born. And the biggest groups were coming from the FDR and the Truman administration, so that was good. Everybody together, that's what it's going to take. And a lot of leadership by young people. 350.org is run all by, I'm by a factor of 2, the oldest person involved in the operation. So I've gotten used to taking my marching orders for many years from people half my age, and it's often a good idea. And I was so happy to see, among other outcomes of the election in Vermont, the number of younger people now headed to Montpelier, and I think that's going to be a real help, in part because they're less infected with the idea of what can't be done, what's impossible or impolitic or so on and so forth. And one hopes that you'll figure out how to vaccinate them against that particular disease as they arrive.
So I'm drawing some parallels here back over 100 years ago. So if we want to talk about real age, let's go way back. When I was in Norway studying there for 5 years, a colleague by the name of Fridtjof Nansen in the early 1900s, just starting to understand how the oceans function. And as he crossed over from being a scientist to an activist, who, by the way, founded the first refugee system ever in the world. So you're walking a noble path here. But he wrote a very interesting pamphlet. I've recently been consolidating my years of work, and I came across an old pamphlet that, if you're interested, I'd get it to you. But he talked about the ethics of humanity and the ethics of science. And so I think there's a lot of parallels there, and this was before World War I. And he was concerned about the rate at which humanity was progressing before World War I. So if you think of that and going to heart, there's a longer curve we could think about. And so drawing to that parallel, I'm just wondering, as we have now crossed from the scientific side to the political side, there's very good coordination going on the political side now through a group called Indivisible. And I'm wondering if you've been able to connect with them for that longer arc of justice and humanity, because we do all realize that in the end, each individual is inscribed with their own sense of self-ethic. It's just a few who are taking leadership are viewing it improperly, and they're trying to lead us on a wrong path.
Absolutely.
So have you worked with the Indivisible community to try to figure out a better way for the scientists to mobilize while still remaining objective?
Yeah, we work with them and lots of others on all kinds of things, including electoral politics, and that's been really good to see. One of the things that's really important to realize, I think, and Indivisible's name does a good job of it, is a reminder that trying to view in isolation the sets of problems into which we've wandered is probably a mistake. And so climate change is at one level a scientific issue having to do with carbon and so on, but it obviously clearly also turns out to help us understand the world in all kinds of other ways, to help us understand what poverty and inequality have come to mean, and to help us start with the preparations we're going to need to make for a future that's very different. I mean, even if we get everything right at this point, the world's going to be quite different. Look, for example, at what a convulsion and spasm it's thrown our nation into, that there are 3,000 people on the southern border trying to get in, okay? And so suddenly we're tear gassing people and putting children in cages and on and on and on. Then go read the scientific literature that predicts that even if we meet the Paris goals, which at the moment we're no place close to meeting, even if we meet them, we can expect 200 or 300 million climate refugees in the course of this century, endlessly more than the great world wars of the last century produced. and then ask yourself, having watched what 1 million refugees coming into Europe managed to do to the political system there and the add-on effects across the Atlantic here and so on and so forth, how we're going to cope with that. When you start asking questions like that, you begin to understand that we're going to have to deal with this in very big ways. And that's one of the reasons why it's really important, I think, that people like Senator Sanders are thinking about a whole suite of issues about inequality and about race and class and all this stuff at the same time. And that seems like an overwhelming kind of burden to move on, but maybe not. I mean, as we start to make the changes that y'all are starting to make, they move us hopefully fairly swiftly in the right direction. Just to give an example, if we're able to move quickly to renewable energy, instead of relying on fossil fuels, we've knocked the pins out from one of the biggest sources of inequality in the whole world. I mean, think about our political system. It's been overwhelmed by, above all, the two guys, the Koch brothers, who spent more money on politics than the Republican Party and the Democratic Party combined over the last 2 decades. And they're only able to do that because they're the biggest oil and gas barons in North America, okay? The same exercise is repeated around the world. That's why people pay attention to Vladimir Putin or the Saudi royal family or whoever it is, you know? And as we move to a different world where power comes locally and where those economies are more local and things, we move in different, hopefully, in a different direction. We've done some of that work. And we begin to model what it looks like to do things on a community basis instead of a kind of corporate, transnational basis. And that's a good place because it lets us be oddly more generous with each other around the world if things are working better close to home. It's actually a good question to end on too, because I know you've got to move on to important things. And Energy Action Network and my old friend Jared Duvall and others have got really important things to tell you. I was glad you asked about Fritjof Nansen, because among other things, along with being a great scientist and a great humanist, he was a very devoted cross-country skier. Made his way across Greenland and then across the Antarctic. I mean, he was so. So I'm going to leave you and go off to Breadloaf and ski all afternoon while you all are at work here. And I just want to say extraordinary thanks once more. The work that you're doing couldn't be more important. And it's really important in the towns where you are, but it's worth remembering every once in a while that it's awfully important what you're doing for the one tired old beautiful planet that we have. It's been awfully nice to see the snow on the ground these last, in our remarkable Snowvember that we've been having. And my final words of, maybe my only words of wisdom to you would just be, take no snowstorm for granted anymore. Make the absolute most out of each one when they come. Thank you all so much.